Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, so today we're diving into James Clear's massive bestseller, Atomic Habits. But, we're actually going to look at his insights through a completely different lens. Let's just go ahead and forget the standard idea of habits as these mundane daily chores or simple life hacks or tricks to force yourself to floss. Instead, we're going to explore the much deeper, non-literal reality of what a habit actually is. We're talking about a fundamental shift in your very identity.
Now, what if success has absolutely nothing to do with your goals? I know it sounds crazy, right? Usually when we decide we want to improve something, we become completely consumed by the end goal. We want to lose 10 pounds, write a best-selling book, or double our income. But what if focusing on that goal is literally the exact thing holding you back? Prevailing wisdom always claims that goals drive success, but as we're about to see, our outcomes are actually just lagging measures of our foundational habits. Just look at the math of compounding here. It reveals a staggering reality. If you get just 1% better every day for 1 year, just 1%, you don't just end up a little better, you end up nearly 38 times better. On the flip side, a 1% daily decline basically zeroes you out completely. Think of it like shifting an airplane's route by just 3.5 degrees right at takeoff. The nose moves just a few feet, right? But by the time you cross the entire country, you end up landing in Washington, D.C. instead of New York. These tiny, entirely invisible choices compound into completely different destinations.
Okay, imagine this. You've got an ice cube sitting on a table in a freezing cold room. You can actually see your breath. Slowly, the room starts to warm up. 25 degrees, 26, 28, 31. You're putting in all this time, all this heat, but the ice cube is literally just sitting there. Nothing is happening. And honestly, this is exactly what early progress feels like when we try to change our lives. We make these small changes, we see absolutely zero immediate results, and eventually, we just give up. But wait, here is the realization that absolutely changes everything. That previous invisible work, it wasn't wasted at all. It was simply being stored. When the temperature finally hits 32 degrees and the ice begins to melt, it looks like an overnight success, right? But it was actually the accumulation of all those prior hidden degrees. Clear calls this the plateau of latent potential. So if you're struggling to build a good habit right now, you haven't lost your ability to improve. You just haven't crossed this critical threshold yet. So the crucial takeaway here is that true long-term thinking really isn't about goal-driven thinking to win the game. It's about goalless thinking, building systems to keep playing the game. Think about it for a second. Every Olympian wants a gold medal. Every job candidate wants a position. If winners and losers have the exact same goals, then the goal itself cannot possibly be what differentiates them. You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. It is time to stop obsessing over the finish line and just focus entirely on the machine that actually gets us there. Which brings us to the very core of this explainer. Let's look at the actual definition of atomic. When we hear that word, most of us just think, tiny. But look at the second half of this definition, the single irreducible unit of a larger system. Just as atoms build molecules, atomic habits are the fundamental building blocks of a massive machine. We aren't talking about isolated, literal chores here. We are talking about the core components of a compound growth engine. And this brings us to the absolute crux of our whole non-literal focus today, the 3 layers of behavior change. The outer layer is changing your outcomes, right? Your results. The middle layer is changing your processes, so your systems and daily routines. And hey, both of those are fine. But true, lasting transformation only happens at the deepest layer, identity. This is the whole shebang, your worldview, your self-image, your deepest core beliefs. If we try to change our habits by focusing entirely on what we want to achieve or get, those outcome-based habits, we're working outside in. And here's the problem. If we don't shift our underlying beliefs, our old identity will eventually sabotage us. Like, you might genuinely want better health, but if you subconsciously still identify as someone who prioritizes couch surfing over exertion, the sofa is literally always going to win. We absolutely have to build identity-based habits, working from the inside out, focusing deeply on who we wish to become. Okay, so you might be wondering, how do we actually formulate this new identity? Well, it happens through a surprisingly simple 2-step process. First off, you aren't born with preset beliefs about yourself. Your identity emerges directly out of your habits. So if you want to change who you are, step 1, decide the type of person you want to be. Work backwards. Ask yourself, who is the type of person that could learn a new language? Or who could write a book? Probably a consistent, disciplined person, right? And then step 2, you simply prove it to yourself with small wins. As Clear brilliantly puts it, every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become.
You don't just snap your fingers and suddenly become someone new. You undergo these little micro-evolutions by casting continuous votes. Your identity is literally your repeated beingness. Now, no single isolated instance is going to transform your beliefs overnight. But as you keep casting votes day after day, the evidence builds up and the story you tell yourself actually begins to shift. Meaningful change doesn't require radical, sweeping change. It really just requires a majority vote.
And remember, you don't need a unanimous vote to win an election, just a majority. This is the profound psychological purpose of building a habit. If you write a page, you are a writer. Practice the violin, you're a musician. Start a workout, you are an athlete. Every single time you choose to take that action, you are actively embodying that identity in that exact moment. You aren't trying to get in shape. When you step into the gym for those 30 minutes, you are an athlete. You are literally becoming yourself. Now, to cast those votes consistently, you need a reliable engine. Every single habit operates through this continuous 4-step neurological loop. First, the cue triggers your brain. Then the craving is the motivational force. You don't actually crave smoking a cigarette. You crave the feeling of relief. Next is the response, which is the actual action you take. And finally, the reward. That's the end goal that satisfies the craving, which basically teaches your brain to remember the whole action for next time. And those 4 stages directly translate into the 4 laws of behavior change. Think of these as the mechanical levers you pull to redesign your environment and basically guarantee you cast the right votes. To build a good habit, make the cue obvious, make the craving attractive, make the response incredibly easy, and make the reward satisfying. And hey, need to break a bad habit? Just invert the whole process. Make it invisible, make it unattractive, make it difficult, and make it unsatisfying. This brings up a fascinating quote. Environment is the invisible hand that shapes human behavior. This completely reframes the myth of willpower. Society loves to tell us that bad habits are just a moral weakness, right? That we just lack discipline. But the science shows something totally different. Highly disciplined people don't use sheer willpower to resist temptation all day. No way. They simply structure their lives to spend less time in tempting environments. They make the cues of good habits super obvious and the cues of bad habits entirely invisible. This really highlights the stark contrast between having something, like losing weight, earning money, reducing stress, and becoming someone. Habits can absolutely help you achieve external success, for sure. But fundamentally, they are not about having something. They are the ultimate channel through which you develop your deepest beliefs. They are about becoming someone. You quite literally become your habits. But, and this is absolutely crucial, there is a massive trap we have to avoid here. The more sacred an idea is to us, that is, the more deeply it is tied to our identity, the more strongly we will defend it against criticism. As we successfully latch onto a new identity, that very identity can actually become a prison. If you tie your entire self-worth into being the CEO or the star athlete, what happens when the company folds or you blow out your knee? When you cling way too tightly to one rigid identity, you become brittle. You lose the capability to adapt when life inevitably changes. Because our self-image can totally get in the way of future growth, progress actually demands unlearning. A lack of self-awareness is poison. Reflection and review is the antidote. We absolutely must periodically reflect and review to ensure our old habits and our rigid identities aren't holding us back from reaching that next level. We have to keep our identity small and flexible. We need to redefine, say, I am the CEO, to a much more adaptable, I am the type of person who builds and creates things. And look, we know this system works because the author lived it in the most extreme way possible. James Clear was actually hit in the face with a baseball bat in high school. It resulted in severe skull fractures and put him in a medically induced coma. His dreams were completely shattered, but by leaning entirely on atomic habits, these tiny changes yielding remarkable results, microsystems like simply going to bed early, keeping his room clean, slowly lifting weights, he methodically recovered. And years later, he became an academic All-American. There was no single defining miracle. It was just a long series of tiny breakthroughs that compounded into a brand new identity. So we'll conclude this explainer with a final, lingering thought for you to carry forward. Are you becoming the type of person you want to become? I want you to really look past your daily checklist. Look past the immediate rewards or literal life hacks. Your trajectory is entirely in your hands, and every single action you take today is a vote. So cast your votes wisely. Thank you so much for watching, and keep building those atomic systems.